Thank you, everyone, for joining us again at 1:30. We're going to go ahead and get started. Following the agenda, we have some subcommittee reports and next steps. We're going to start with the Regulations and Gap Analysis Subcommittee. One of the working groups that was formed was to talk about 30% versus 80% state of charge in equipment. George Kirch, I'd like you to kind of start that discussion off. I know you've been working with Scott, and just maybe update us on any activities that might have happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Bob. So the state of charge issue on UN 3481, obviously that's a very sensitive topic for a lot of our members in the industry generally. And Scott's group, IFALPA, had put a proposal in at the last ICAO meeting last year or the year and a half ago. And we've been discussing the issue amongst our members, and Scott and I had an opportunity to talk last week. We've been trying to catch up with each other for quite some time. So Scott and Doug was there as well, and Tim Shepard and I had a really good conversation with Scott about their current position on the state of charge issues and UN 3481, and whether there might be a compromise there somewhere or how he envisions that being enforced. And we talked about the data, what the data conveys in terms of the volumes of products that are being shipped and the low number of incidents, and whether a state of charge limit really is the right way to go for shipments of UN 3481 by air. So like I said, it was the initial conversation. We've set up another meeting to talk in about 2 weeks to see in what direction each of our organizations is going with this issue. Again, the intent here is to keep the dialogue open between IFALPA and with PRBA and the industry generally. At the end of that call, we agreed to meet again, but at this point, we are not close in terms of trying to come up with some sort of solution or agreement on this. But I think we've just agreed to continue the dialogue and agree to disagree at this point in terms of the need for a state of charge, and we'll have to see where it goes. I know ICAO's got a meeting coming up, and I guess Dwayne or Kevin will speak to that, and then their energy storage device working groups meeting, and then finally there's another ICAO meeting in the fall where this will be addressed. So there's a lot going on in that space, but I wanted to emphasize to this committee, again, Scott and I have agreed to continue the dialogue to see if there is some path forward where we can, come up with some agreed to regulatory solution, if there is one, for the state of charge proposal that's going to be addressed at ICAO over the next, I'd say, 6 months or so. So that's essentially where we are today.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. Scott, did you want to add anything? You're part of that group?
Yes. The first thing I want to note is the incident data is not, we don't see that as particularly germane to the conversation that we're having with George. Obviously, we think there's an issue, and we want to find ways to address the issue. So before I met and talked with George, Tim, and Doug, I did meet with Mike Tobin and Doug Ferguson. Mike Tobin from Alaska, Doug Ferguson from Boeing. And we tried to come up with ideas that would enhance flight safety while not requiring every battery in a device to be shipped at a reduced state of charge. So we have come up with several ideas along those lines. We're willing to discuss them, but we do want to hear the concerns that the industry has. We talked to George, and he mentioned a couple of main concerns, and I think he agreed he's going to go back talk to the members. And again, we want to hear the concerns they have with shipping things at reduced states of charge as a method to try to remove the fire risk from these transport. Thanks.
Thanks. And that's really what this whole committee's about, is just looking at these issues through each other's lenses and, seeing if there's any kind of common ground. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing on that. Those working groups are really valuable to us because there's lots of little issues, and if we can work together, it's going to be a better product. Also, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I don't know if George mentioned, he said we have plans to meet again in the future. Did you say next month?
It's in about 3 weeks or so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to emphasize that, yes, we are going to continue to meet, and we do have meetings planned. So we are continuing the dialogue.
All right, great, thanks. And next, we have the ICAO update. It's the update on including work on state of charge for lithium batteries contained in and packed with equipment. Dwayne Fund will be doing that. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Bob. Perfect lead-in from George. So my intention right now is to talk about this initiative at ICAO, where we're considering potential safety mitigation measures for lithium batteries contained in or packed in equipment. Contained in or packed with equipment, okay? So that's our ICAO effort. As a U.S. representative there, we're going to, U.S. delegation will work on that. What we've asked the committee to do and what the committee's agreed to do is to help feed us and inform us from the U.S. stakeholder perspective. And so that we have the information we need in order to continue on with this initiative and hopefully make the most informed decisions at the end. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the ICAO effort. I think that it's important to give a little in context why we're doing it, because I've heard people ask why are we doing this now versus some other effort. And then sort of an update of where we're at in the progress. So next slide, Steve. Oh. I don't like, yeah. You knew there was going to be some problem I was going to have that everyone else can manage just fine. But somehow, go. Did you do that or did I? 3 seconds ago. Oh, okay, good, thank you. I knew you'd manage it. So ICAO, how ICAO works is, there's the structure at ICAO is the top level is called the council. And the council is a very political, it's a global organization, 192 or so states involved in this, based on the Chicago Convention. And there's a permanent representative of the United States, and that's at a ambassador level. So that's appointed and confirmed representative of the United States. Below that, the next level is called the Air Navigation Commission. And those are really the aviation experts. There's well, he's called the deputy representative, but that's the body that really manages all the various panels and all the various issues within ICAO. So that's an individual that really covers all the aspects of aviation as it relates to U.S. inputs to ICAO. Below that is groups that are generally called technical bodies. So the Dangerous Goods Panel is a technical body that we report to the Air Navigation Commission. I'll call them the ANC. And so the ANC, and why that is because when it was formed to develop the technical instructions for the transport of dangerous goods by air. And those were viewed to be technical, classification, packaging, hazard communication, not policy-related things, but technical. And so now the main tasking for the Dangerous Goods Panel is to maintain those safety regulations. So we work on a 2-year cycle. We come up with recommendations. Many are you familiar with the very traditional approach of there's 20 panel members. One panel member submits a proposal to amend the regulations. Each panel member takes that back, vets it however they vet it within their country. Some have different processes, certainly. And then brings back their views on that proposal, and then we sort of discuss it out, see if we can agree, not agree, what the language should be, those kinds of things. Traditional process. But the panel as a technical body just basically suggests these things to the ANC. Now, what's happened with most of the things that are involved, the amendments, the ANC says absolutely, everybody agreed with that, full consensus, we approve, print the technical instructions. Lithium batteries, over the years, we've had some situations where we did not have consensus on the issues because the technical merits of it weren't exactly obvious. So from the ANC's view, they're thinking, well, anything technical you should be able to come to a consensus on, right? Why would there be differences of opinion? Those differences of opinion usually come from policy-related issues, different views, perspectives, those kinds of things. But lithium batteries, we've seen issues, and our parent body wants us to be as consensus-based as possible. They want full agreement. You know, certainly safety is best served if everyone's on the same page. So with that in mind, the ANC gave a tasking to the panel to look at mitigation measures for the transport of lithium batteries. And they have a mechanism called job card. I don't know if they've issued us more than 1 or 2 job cards, but we have one for lithium batteries. And within that job card, it tells the Dangerous Goods Panel to do 5 things. One of them is related to the packaging performance standard that we're utilizing SAE G27 to do. One of them's on greater granularity in the classification, which we're using the UN Lithium Battery Working Group on Classification to do. One of them related to risk assessment and primarily about ensuring transparency of the cargo that's being offered, which translated to mean Section 2 batteries. You know, looking at either the elimination, reduction, reconsideration, all of those things of how we treat the smaller batteries by, allowing them not to have a transport document. So the panel did reduce the use of Section 2 for packaged batteries in a significant way. Now it's pretty well reduced for packaged batteries. There's a 4th that's generally about simplification of regs. And the 5th one was to consider potential mitigation measures for the transport of lithium or equipment containing or packed with lithium batteries. So the panel has a tasking to address this in a way that we can report back to the ANC. That was basically, that job card was somewhere, issued in 2016. They approved it, the latest version in 2020. Obviously not a lot was done in 2020. But 2021, November, while we're still trying to sort out how to manage that, IFALPA did submit the paper on applying a 30% stated charge limit to batteries packed with or containing equipment. So that sort of brought to the forefront a reason for us to address this issue directly, addressing that proposal as well as the ANC task. So in the discussion of that, ICAO, you're probably well aware in the aviation world, ICAO is putting a great deal of emphasis on risk assessments of cargo. And they've got some expertise that they're developing in-house. And so the decision of the panel is to do something a little different. Rather than us just debate these proposals and say yes or no and talk about text and language and compromises, as the word that was just used, let's do a risk assessment that doesn't recommend a policy decision. It doesn't propose any text. It's an assessment that's going to give us additional information to make a better decision that we're going to have to recommend a solution to. So we had a working group, Energy Storage Devices Working Group. The panel tasked that to us. And we had very strong terms of reference. And we had the promise of help from ICAO in the risk assessment area to help lead us through this. So that's the background of where we're at. That really started in 2022. Took us a while to sort of organizationally put that together. ICAO, how they would fund some of the support and that kind of thing. And then we've had a number of, we've brought it to this committee a couple of times. We've had a number of meetings of the working group virtually. And then we've had some meetings during regularly scheduled ICAO sessions. So what I'm going to talk about now is sort of the outcome of that approximate year worth of effort, and then where we see this going in a timeline for when we're going to be asked as a panel to make a decision. So next slide, please. So the initial direction from ICAO, so initially we had some meetings and talked about, what kind of assessment should we do? What kinds of information would we need? What would this look like? How would it be structured? It's planning meetings, and I think we briefed that before. And at the time, the bow tie assessment was the preference for ICAO. And so we embarked on developing this bow tie assessment. And I'll go through it in a minute. And we briefed a little bit this before, and I know it's not as traditional for this group or the United States to use, and it's questionable in people's, people have different views how helpful it is. It's really just an illustration of the conditions. It's a snapshot of what the provisions are today. But then I'll talk about how we're going to use that. So up until now, I think we're at the point now where we're calling essentially complete this draft bow tie. And it's still bow tie because we want to meet as an ICAO panel group and talk about if we're good with the way it is. But next slide, please. So if anybody wants to charge the stage and look at it up close, they're free to. Obviously, this isn't the forum to debate the blocks on the bow tie, right? But essentially, Steve, do we have just the basic one that shows the left, the middle, and the right? Yeah, they're right there. Oh, it's on the back, yes. So again, a short, left is the preventative barriers. So we'll start in the middle. The middle is the hazard we're trying to prevent. We don't want to happen. Just termed it, general terms, thermal runaway. The right's the preventative measures. What would prevent that from happening? And this is all what's in the technical instructions today, because we're focused on what the dangerous goods panel can influence. We influence the provisions in the technical instructions. We can't influence manufacturer's quality control, other types of portions of the manufacturing sector. We influence what's in the technical instructions. So that's what we focus on. So it's the preventative measures in the technical instructions. There's the incident in the middle. And the right is the mitigation measures. If the event happens, what's there to protect the aircraft on the right, okay? So for our work, again, for the technical instructions, the primary piece is on the left, the preventative measures, the provisions of the technical instructions that are going to prevent that event if it occurs, okay? So I think we've got just a bunch of these. And within each one, so it just keeps getting more and more deep, right? So we decided on, within this structure, there's a threat line is a certain condition. We developed 3 conditions: packed with equipment, contained in equipment, and vehicles. And because there's a recognition that the risk might be different with packed with, might be different with contained in, and it's going to be different with vehicles. And vehicles in our business is not automotive vehicles necessarily. It's probably more small stuff like e-bikes, e-scooters, hoverboards, smaller things that could be shipped as vehicles, but they're packaged and smaller. That's more prominent, but it includes the automotive vehicles. Due to the time constraints that we have, we've sort of put the vehicles on the side because it's much different than the packed with and contained in, and we're focused on the packed with and contained in. So as you see, it gets detailed, and I don't want to train people on this, but Kevin can certainly do that on the break if you'd like. But as you just go through this, since we're not going to look at any of the particular blocks, again, this is intended to be just a depiction of what the regulations are today. It's not a measurement or judgment on what works, what doesn't work, what's there, what's not there. It's there. It's intended to be what's there. And so it's there, and it's also an important point of this is the intention is to put everything there. So there's not when we hear like, well, why would you do that? Well, because that's a provision in technical instructions. And the only way we can make sure, if it doesn't apply or does apply is by talking about it. Put it up there, and if it's not applicable, then we take it off. But we put everything up there initially, and that's part of the process. So if you go through, again, you'll have time. We've finally sort of had to get through some approval processes, not necessarily within DOT to post it on our website, but within those that helped us with this. This is software. It's a software. It's a specialized software, the Bowtie XP software. Even ICAO did not have a license. So our UK Aviation Authority was very, very helpful and gracious to help use their license to help us in drafting this. And so, of course, we had to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the posting of this. And so we're able to get this up now. If people do want to look through it, they certainly can. Our intention is, though, that we hope at this stage, it basically, again, just a snapshot of what's there now. We do it, ICAO has agreed to also post it on their website. We don't know exactly. We got to work with them to figure out what that looks like and what their webpage looks like and how that's done and those kinds of things. So if we speed up to where we're at today, that's the bow tie, again, it's just supposed to identify, the measures that are in place now, and hopefully that'll show us if there's any gaps. Hopefully that shows any gaps. The next step is how do we place that into some kind of narrative? How do we use that to then assess whether those gaps are critical, are they properly covered, not covered, those kinds of things. Again, we're not recommending any solutions yet. We're just kind of looking at, are there gaps and how critical are they to our concerns? And so while we took a long time with the bow tie, ICAO has evolved even further in their assessment and was meeting with various, I know they met with MIT and some MIT doctoral folks, and they have this system called, this process called the System Theoretic Process Analysis Method. And it's what ICAO would like to see see if this really is an evolved way of looking at risk and a more modernized way of looking at risk. It focuses a lot just in layman's terms, because that's how I think. Not less about past behavior and incidents, because the primary thought is past performance isn't a guarantee of future, or past experience isn't a guarantee of future performance, right? It's like the stock market. So it looks more at the barriers you have in place, the risk that you believe you have, and the consequences of that. And so we're hoping through this then that we're able to sort of take out some of the subjectivity of the views. We're able to identify or come up with some type of measurement of the strength of these controls and their mitigation effectiveness. This part we're really, really relying a great deal on ICAO. They have this group called Safety Management Experts. They're walking us through this, walking Kevin through this, and he's becoming an expert now. In fact, he's going to go to a class here at MIT and even advance it further. And so at this point, the Energy Storage Devices Working Group has set up a smaller task force of about 6 to 8 people that have been meeting twice a week to sort of go through the template that ICAO has provided us in this STPA process and try to fill that out utilizing basically the bow tie. That is, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, that ultimately that leads to some type of a weighted system of value of effectiveness, whether that's a color scheme or a number scheme. I'm not clear which, either, yeah. And that's the hope. And then from there, countries or panel members can make a determination on whether or not there are changes that are required based on that assessment. And that's the end goal, the end result. So if we can go to the very last one, perhaps. Oh, okay, not the last one yet. So this is just a sort of what the STPA activities, what they intend to do. And so the template will have us, we'll define the purpose of the analysis, the control structure, any unsafe control actions, and then these loss scenarios, these loss scenarios, causal scenarios that lead to unsafe control actions. And then once, that's part of sort of the outline of what we expect to do. On the right, the risk evaluation activities, then we start to assess the severity, discuss potential mitigations, and you can read the rest, right? And so it's a formalized template. we hope that it leads to a more structured consideration, and it's more standard amongst all the panel members, because when November 2021, I felt we'll put that proposal, I'm happy to tell you, the United States supported it. We supported it. And it was based in large part on what we've heard already, the data we have, not the data we don't have. And the data we have is very clear on the consequences and what state of charge does and how state of charge affects the likelihood of a thermal runaway and its outcomes, right? So we agreed to this process as well because we want to be better informed. And so we hope that this does that, and I hope it gives other panel members the same level of information in making those same decisions. Last slide. Oh, I knew I'd mess it up. So timeline, because I've been asked a lot on the timeline, and I understand that it's probably faster than most people are used to, and there's reasons why. But it's probably slower than a lot of you are used to in your normal operations, business operations. If you think of something taking 2 years to make a decision, you probably think that would be crazy in your own business. But then government, you think, well, you should take 10. So, we're trying to get somewhere in between. So this is the basic timeline. But the next step is really the small task group on the STPA is working to develop that as much as we can, which is mostly just filling in the information that we've gathered from the bow tie into the template by the next Dangerous Goods panel meeting, which is in May. That's a working group meeting. That's not one of the official ones where we're taking any decisions, and it's translation. It's a working group meeting. It's in Brazil. And we'll go through that and as a panel, talk about, because, we have a small group right now participating. As a bigger group, talk about, is this where we want to go? Are we missing something? Are there other things? What do we need to do between May and October or November if we're going to be asked to take a decision? What more do people need, or what else do people need to get them comfortable taking a decision? This is where I think, from my perspective, that we want to really talk more completely about inputting the data that we've talked about today. What data? So far, we've briefed at ICAO the data that's been briefed to this committee. And that data is the trip data, incident data, the commodity flow, import-export data, and the FAA's data on impacts of state of charge, consequence data. Those are our 3 data points because that's the data we have. And that data's been introduced to the ICAO Dangerous Goods panel. Those representatives of those data sets have been invited to represent that data at the next meeting, okay, which is a positive. Because I know I've talked before, ICAO's not a public meeting. And it's not just open to anyone who wants to go. It's national authorities and their advisors. And so it's very aviation-centric, and many countries have an airline, their national airline is their advisor. The United States does not do that. It's government. So, but we do think it's important to have individuals in a very focused way to come in and represent the data if there's any questions on it. And there'll be some expectations, certainly, that we don't, those representatives are representing data, not the solutions or the policy or where to take that data or what to do with that data, but more about, this is what the data is, this is where we got it, this is what it is, this is what we think it says. So the last thing I'd like to talk about, what we've asked this committee to do, and I thank you, George and Mike, for taking this on board, is because we're trying to find, when this started, we knew that we weren't going to have all the answers. We knew this was going to be a very very big challenge. We knew there's significant impacts, there's significant safety impacts, and there's significant business practice impacts. Understood. And so we wanted to get as much input as we can from U.S. stakeholders. The timelines that we have took out some of our traditional options, like a Federal Register notice or things that we would just send out and hope for months to hear back on. But we decided instead to use what Congress told us to use this committee for, and that's to provide us inputs on these critical international issues. So well, thank you for that. I know you've just now started some of those discussions, and I'd like to offer up that PHMSA and FAA would be happy to join in any of the subcommittee discussions if you're at a working level. As we've talked about before, there are some limits of the Federal Advisory Committee about meeting in a public if we're going to talk about decisional things, we have to be in a public setting. If we're going to talk about planning and how we want to work through some of this stuff and how we want to organize some of this stuff, then we can talk in these working groups with you. But I'm happy to meet in that smaller group, talk a little bit more detail about how this looks. I know I don't understand all of it either, but we're working hard to get there. We're learning along the way. We don't think we need to understand all of it to move forward on it, because the process, trust the process in this case. And but to bring more clarity and comfort level and see how everybody can fit in, we're happy to meet that. So with that, I think that's the last. That's the last slide. So I know we went through it pretty quickly, but I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions? George Kirchner.
Thanks, George Kirschner with PRBA. So Dwayne, thanks again for that explanation, because every time I hear it, I pick up something new. So it really does help to understand the process and how it's working at ICAO and Energy Storage Advice Working Group and now the new SDPA. So thinking about the SDPA and the fact that ICAO is tasked with doing that, right? The folks that are the experts on, what is it, risk assessment within ICAO. So would you think they would benefit from hearing from the industry, who are these large volume shippers of these UN 3481 products? Because again, I'm not sure if they're going to do this more detailed risk assessment. I understand how the bow tie works, because I was looking at the regulations more than anything else. But this more detailed risk assessment, it seems they're doing a much deeper dive into the issue. So without the knowledge of how companies are shipping their products and how they're palletized and put in packages and how batteries are manufactured and products are manufactured, it doesn't seem like that seems that there would be a gap there when they're doing that STPA.
Okay. Well, absolutely. Let me respond to that, because when we set the working energy storage devices working group up, we worked with the officials, the chairman and vice chairman of the panel, the secretariat. Some of these folks kind of understand where this is going to go. We got enough experience to know as far as the process and the involvement and the needs of that. So firstly, ICAO's not making any kind of determinations on anything. They're our guide through the process. So they're just helping us through the process, where the information should go, how it should be, what order, where it should go. If they're an honest third party, in that if they don't understand something because they're not as deeply tied to it, they'll ask. They understand aviation. They understand how the aircraft is designed and operated. There's very little, certainly, involvement with the shipping community at ICAO at large, right? We talk about ICAO at large. So they'll ask those questions. But the assessment, we're very clear when we wrote terms to the assessment. The assessment is about how do the conditions that are currently in the technical instructions, whether they need to be changed or not changed, and why. And if there is additional information, then either the ICAO panel members or the Energy Storage Devices Working Group members should reach out within their structure and get that information. So what we have thought, full disclosure, is there needs to be some level of involvement, certainly. I mentioned that a minute ago, some very focused level about the data. And I'll finish this thought, then I'll come back. And so that's why we've brought in a public setting the commodity flow data, the data we have available, the data we could identify quickly that's already there that we know of, the trip data, the shipping data, and the consequence data. So we brought that in, and ICAO has agreed that, yes, I should say the panel members panel members, not the ICAO body. The panel members have agreed, yes, we should introduce that and bring it in, okay? Now, what value would other parties provide, particularly United States parties provide on this? I'm willing to talk about that. For example, this isn't to be clear, this isn't a traditional area where you're going to, for example, the United States, where we're going to send out a notice of proposed rulemaking, and you're going to come back and comment and say, cost benefit doesn't work. No, ICAO's not, they don't do it that way, right? So we try to set it up as an assessment. The conditions of the TI don't need, I think they're pretty clear. I think we have people that can identify what those are. And then from there, whether or not how a business process works beyond that, that's not, that the technical instructions have no oversight over. I'm not, that has been sort of put out aside because we can't affect that. And we can't standardize it, and we can't assure it's part of the provisions, right? Now, if it can be added as a requirement, that's what hopefully the next step after we get the STPA to do. So to answer your concerns, I can't direct ICAO to change the procedures that they follow, okay? So I can't make them have a public meeting where anybody can be invited. I can't tell them they have to have a meeting that's got 20 U.S. industry people and 2 European industry people. I can't change their process, but what I can do is make it as transparent in the United States as possible and continue to let you folks know what I know and what we're looking at and see how your concerns can be incorporated into this. That's what I know I can control. I can't control ICAO. But ICAO, the Secretariat has agreed to invite a representative for the shipping data, a representative for TRIP, and of course the FAA will be there for this other data, the data that's been presented to represent that data.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Dwayne?
Sure. I'm here all day.
Don't get trip your bartenders and servers, right? So as far as, again, going back to the timeline here, so we've got this timeline where this STPA will be completed by, well, it won't be completed by the meeting in Brazil, right? Would you expect it to be?
Correct.
It will or won't?
It will not.
Okay, gotcha.
And before you ask your question, when you say completed, I'm not sure, I don't know what that looks like. I believe it's going to evolve, and this is all about providing additional information that we don't have today to make a decision. But ultimately, in November, we're going to be asked to take a decision on, in particular, 30% proposal. Hopefully, this data helps us. For some, it might. For some, whether it's 20% done or 100% done, we're going to be asked to take that decision. But that's still 20% more information than we would have had under the traditional process.
And not to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but the whole STPA process, it sounds like it's a group of very smart people at ICAO that are doing this, that have virtually no knowledge of how portable electronic devices are packaged and offered for transport. So, I mean, again, I just feel like there's an opportunity there for them to meet with some of our members so they can have a better idea of how these things are safely shipped around the world. That, to me, is a full analysis. So we can follow up later on that one, but I just feel like there's a hole in the analysis, per se, if they don't have a really good idea of how these things are currently being packaged and offered for transport.
Follow up with me. I can facilitate something if there's value. I would ask, we'll have that conversation, because I don't envision what that would be, the example. Like, because I can tell you from my experience, it's, for this effort, they know what's in the technical instructions. They know what the packaging requirements are, the inner packaging, the outer packaging, how they can be consolidated, the marking, label, acceptance, they know all that. Talking about business practices that are outside of that, I don't know how that's valuable. But if it is, let's talk about it. Example, the other thing I try to steer away from is these extreme examples. So we'll have for example, we'll have a particular application of a commodity that may have 100,000 different articles. And we'll talk about the 1 and 2 extremes and say, oh, this is going to be a problem for this. And we're like, well, what about the other 900,000 or whatever those are, 99,000. And so that gets in the way sometimes of our discussions, is when people start to debate those extreme examples versus the rule. Because all these regulations and standards are the general applicability. That's what applies, generally, not the extreme, or should apply general applicability. But absolutely, that's main intent, one of the main reasons to bring it for you guys is if you have better ideas. The only one I would have difficulty with, be honest, I've said this all along, is just saying, yes, come sit at the table and listen. That's the only one that doesn't quite fit into the procedures of ICAO. But anything outside of that, I could probably help facilitate that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Dwayne. We appreciate that. It's great.
Everybody needs to know the clicker's right here. It's very easy. It's got a button.
We'll continue with our subcommittee reports and next steps. Supply Chain Safety and Integrity Subcommittee is going to be next. Bob?
I was going to say something about trying to keep everybody awake, but I think it's me we want to try to keep awake here. So poor planning on my part. When I put these slides together, I didn't think about that people would be presenting individual slides. So it's going to be a little bit like the Wrestling Federation, where we do tag teams. But the good thing is you get to hear from a lot of different people. And I would say, with that in mind, if you've got questions as we go through these slides, please ask them when the speaker is up here. So here's the subcommittee members of the Supply Chain Safety and Integrity Subcommittee. I will say I don't have Mike listed there. I apologize, Mike. Mike's been a subject matter expert for us here for the last year or so from Amazon. So he's part of the committee as well, subcommittee. And I guess to start, we'll go back to the beginning and just say, remember that we started, this effort with this Supply Chain Safety and Integrity Committee started with Dr. Tom Chapin from Underwriters Laboratory. The idea was to look at the whole supply chain and to really dive into that and what were the important parts. And so when I came into the group, what we did was we really tried to narrow down what were the parts of the supply chain that were important to the air transport of lithium batteries. So with that in mind, we still do reiterate, we've got the product life cycle listed up there, and there are still a couple of areas where we have deemed it high risk. And I think you'll hear us talk about that today, and I think even through some of the other presentations today, we hit on some of those areas. So again, we talk about low-level manufacturers, distributors that don't comply with requirements, be that the quality of the battery, testing requirements, or other distributors who don't validate the compliance of the product, either knowingly or because they don't understand what the requirements are. And then, again, the last year or so, I think have really reinforced this concern about after-sales extended use of the battery in the product. We're talking about right to repair and other things like that. So again, these are where we see the primary concerns. A manufacturer developing a battery that understands the regulations, is going to comply with the regulations, understands the packaging requirements, that is a less risk area from our perspective. So again, we do work together. So thank you, David. We've got some information here from Tripp just to give you, one of the things that we did over the course of the last 6 months, we've had 3 different subcommittee meetings. We've had Jennifer and Mike come in, talk a little bit about passenger scenarios. We had David come in, provide the Tripp data to us. So you just saw this from David, but again, the majority of the incidents continue to occur in the cabin of passenger carrying aircraft. Saw the device types, e-cigarettes, batteries, laptops, cell phones, power banks. And can the subcommittee help So I'm going to let Stefan talk a little bit more about this. But one of the things I don't know that we highlight a lot in this presentation is one of the things during the subcommittee's meetings, we had a lot of discussion. It's why we brought Jennifer and Mike Tobin in to talk about, is there any help we can provide passenger airlines as far as their communications to customers about lithium battery issues. And, you know, what I like about this particular subcommittee is you've got airlines, you've got manufacturers, distributors, you've got retail. So we recognize that not everybody's at the same level of education when it comes to lithium batteries. And so my wife would not have a problem if I said this, so I'm going to say it, and I know it's live. But if you give her the lithium battery requirements or even the passenger awareness information, she still doesn't know. So again, is there anything we can do to simplify that? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, I'm going to tag team with Stefan. He's going to talk a little bit more about the broader trip data and actions to be taken or recommendations.
Thank you, Bob. I guess I'm going to have to turn this way because it's way too small over there. So what we were trying to do in here. This morning, I was all about enforcement, right? There's the enforcement portion that we really wanted to work on, and we have different ways to do that. Here, I wanted to be more about awareness, outreach, and training and education of mainly passengers on aircraft. What we're doing in here, and we're taking the data that we have, and this is coming straight from the TRIP database, and you can recognize the square in here, and you right away can see that the biggest issue that we're having is within passenger aircraft, being the carry-on and baggage. If we look at numbers, and again, I'm trying to put just rates and ratings and percentage in there. If you look at the number of reports that we had, 149, 133 of those, so 89% are within passenger aircraft with PEDs, personal devices, and different things like that. So for that, when we align the issues that we're having with the solutions or the suggestion and the proposal on how to remediate, we would like to think about a lithium battery safety awareness campaign. And that can go multiple ways. But the bottom line is educating the passengers on the safe usage and storage of lithium batteries. I know that at the gate, some airlines still have the announcement about what needs to be done, the do's and the don'ts of lithium batteries and PEDs in general. But I think we need to consolidate and we need to go even further with that. We can use the monitors and different medias that are present at the airport, and that's all about education and awareness as well. Last point there is, and we talked about that during the subcommittee, is a partnership with the TSA, kind of similar to what they had with the 311 for the liquids that we can bring aboard an aircraft, and do something that is more targeting lithium batteries, what to do, and provide information. So that's really, I think if we were to do that, we actually are probably helping within this 89% of the situation. Now, the bottom portion is really where we need to focus. And this is really where we need to provide different ways to, I don't want to say different ways to ship lithium batteries, but we really need to look into the data to make sure that whatever action we're going to take is warranted based on the type of issues that we're having. And this is what's happening with the cargo. Either cargo on a cargo aircraft, but also the cargo that is brought in a passenger aircraft. These are the type of issues that we really need to look into. One of the corrective actions or the recommendations that we have there is the enforcement. I'm back into the enforcement, and I think we can use the data that we have in TRIP in the 5800 that I presented, and start looking into those the bad actors, as we call them this morning, right? So these are the different things that we can do. I think Dwayne was talking about low-hanging fruits. I think this is something that we can start very, very quickly and put something in place, and I think it would be helping with hopefully reducing this number of incidents. With that, back to you, Bob. Thank you.
Unless they want to ask you questions.
They don't have questions.
Dwayne's got one.
Oh, yeah, that's right, from this morning.
Yeah, we're waiting on the enforcement. Well, I'm curious about the reference to repeat offenders. Do you have a number of, in your analysis of the current 5,800, how many that you've identified as being repeat offenders?
Do I have it? Yes and no. I didn't want to spend too much time in there, but is the information within the 5,800? Yes, it is. It is there, so we can pull that data.
So to translate this to something the committee would do, would then the committee recommend to the department that they focus more attention on 5,800 reporting, identify repeat offenders? Is that a recommendation you're thinking?
That is a recommendation.
Okay. What if that turns out to be 2 or 3?
2 or 3
Offenders.
We're gonna have to look and identify the
Okay.
data. Again, my suggestion was to present on what we have available in the report, right?
And one other question, the corrective actions, I may have missed it, but what's your thoughts there?
Regarding the enforcement?
Yes.
So targeted inspections and audits for repeat offenders. That's probably the first bullet point there. And just coming back on your earlier questions, they're not 1 or 2 or 3, there are more than that. The list goes on, but we can start digging into that. The second one is corrective actions, and I did speak this morning regarding this, CAPA corrective actions, and one of the suggestions there was to force the repeat offenders to go through a lithium battery, the name is escaping my mind right now, but one of the programs, the certification programs that are available.
Okay. Okay. I'm not in enforcement, but I think that's part of whoever the enforcement body is, how they manage that with their attorneys, that kind of stuff. So I don't know really what we can influence in that realm, but and I don't know how visible that is. I don't know, like if that's if you'd ever even see it. It's part of usually it's part of the negotiations between when you issue a letter of investigation and you go through all that. It's protected information. Okay.
Scott, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Stefan. I do have a question regarding the non-compliant shipments. You discussed this morning about non-compliant shipments unrelated to more serious incidents like fire and smoke. Have you gone and analyzed the data to see when non-compliant shipments are actually involved in a more dangerous event other than a paperwork violation, for example?
Yep. So the answer to that question is no. And I know that we alluded to that with David's presentation this morning. But this is something that we need to look into, and I know that TRIP has enhanced the program to capture this information.
And the reason I ask that is enforcement is very often a remedy but it can be a remedy to less serious issues. The real serious issues are fire and smoke, and if we're not understanding what's causing the fire and smoke, making a recommendation to enforcement may not impact that part of the problem.
Yep.
And like I said, I understand any noncompliance is an issue, but, yeah.
Yeah, totally understand, and I agree with your statement. And that goes also in the line that Dick was saying earlier this morning. We want to take a deeper dive into those, I think they are called incident with release. I don't remember exactly the terminology on the 5800, but this is really where we need to focus. And when I was saying that the bottom portion in here, it might be only 11% of those shipments. But I think this is where we need to focus the attention, because that's where more drastic and dramatic outcome could be.
Great. Question from Dave Roth. You
Actually, not a question, but a comment. I mean, kind of what I'm hearing coming out of this conversation is essentially a tasking back to the Data Collection and Analysis Committee, subcommittee, to do some of the crosstabs and so forth that were just talked about. You know, how do non-compliant shipments overlap with, you know, incidents involving fire, heat, and smoke? And I think we know enough about the 5800s that we might be able to get something out of there. So we'll take that as a tasking to go do and bring back to the group.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Stefan? Yes, Kathleen O'Shea.
Hi, Kathy O'Shea with Integer. And I don't think it's a question, it's more of a comment, but I feel like with Stefan's presentation from earlier in this, it seems like it's like the standard pyramid of safety where we need to focus on the non-compliant shipments because there's a lot of them and they're like the foundation. And most likely the non-compliant shipments lead to the fire, the smoke, and you know the incident at the top of the pyramid where you could have something significant. So I guess I support the activities of starting with, you got to start somewhere, and you start with the low-hanging fruit and make sure that you can start preventing the little stuff from happening to make sure that we don't have the big incidents. So I think we definitely need to start with enforcement and training and education to try to minimize those. Because I think then in the end, we're going to minimize bigger and I guess, you know, worse incidents.
Thank you, Kathy. There was just one, two.
Two more questions or comments or questions.
A comment on Kathy's. I think that's a hypothesis that those lower level paperwork incidents, you know, may lead there. And I think that's the analysis that we were just talking about is there a way to tease out whether that's the case or not? And I'm not going to comment on whether we should or should not enforce those other ones, but that hypothesis that they are the basis for more serious incidents is a hypothesis that I think we can test.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So it seems, I would agree that any reported noncompliance or incident should be investigated. So I mean, that seems pretty clear. I don't know to what extent either PHMSA or any of our modal partners do that. I would suspect there's much of that's done, but I don't know. But it's somewhat reactionary in that we're going after things that have already happened. Is there any discussion about a compliance campaign just across the board of the industry, from manufacturers to assemblers to distributors to shippers, anybody who's registered, anybody we know of? Would the committee be comfortable with that? If somebody came and knocked, well, they come to your door. When they come to, you know, other doors, you know, it's a little more proactive, right? We're trying to get out in front, do those audits up front before it happens rather than just react afterwards.
I did speak through the fact that there are a lot of things that we can do, and I think we are only at the beginning of that analysis of what can be done. One point that I would like to bring back again is today we have a certain set of regulations that we have to comply with. One of them is 30% state of charge. which I think everyone will agree there's less risk at 30% than it is at 100% state of charge. And that's the reason why in 2016 it was enacted, right? But we also know from data, from surveys, and from the different investigations that have been done that not everyone is following the 30% state of charge. So one proactive thing that we want to do is probably starting to look at how well is that followed, right? And that probably links back to the bad actors list, right? And the reason I'm going there is that we want to make sure that the current regulations are being followed before we come up or we extend on the 30% state of charge. I think this element, and I really want to make sure that we really look at what's currently being applied and how effective it is before we extend it to other, the contained with, contained with and packed, packed with and contained in.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Yes, please. And you can come back because they're going to tell me that I need to go. So.
One on the phone as well that we'd like to try and work in online.
Okay. Can we hold that one till the end?
It's applicable to this particular discussion.
Okay, well then Stefan can answer from his desk there.
All right, well, let's try this. Let's see if we can get Bob through with the audio through Teams and see if it works. And Bob, if you can tell us who you are and who you represent today.
Oh, hey, great. I actually now can speak, so unmute myself. I'm Bob Richard. I'm the Executive Director of Medical Device Battery Transport Council. I have two of our members there, and they're doing a great job. I want to say thanks to Stefan and what Kathy just said. I totally agree with, and I just want to expand. Like, if we have even small infractions, they're precursors to what could be bigger problems. And from my perspective, since we're so concerned about lithium batteries, lithium battery fires aboard aircraft, even people who are not shipping by air that have incidents in road or other modes of transportation, they could be shipping by air. I would say that we should investigate almost every one of those incidents. And when I was at the agency, we developed something called the IHIP. I don't know if it's called the same thing, but the IHIP was an effort to share the data, particularly from 5800s and enforcement infractions like multiple violators, with all of the modal partners that have responsibility and authority under DOT law to investigate incidents. So I think that in the IHIP, there's algorithms that they take into account the risk. Well, maybe we need to look at those algorithms that are built into that IT system. And anytime there's a lithium battery incident, we raise that higher as a higher risk so that it drives an inspection. I think that could be done. It's just maybe some changes to the IT systems. And then also I want to say, I know there's maybe Dick's there, but I don't know if there's anybody who's in charge of, like Mr. Supko, of FAA enforcement. But FAA enforcement has changed significantly since I left the agency. Now the FAA relies on people who are assigned to airlines to oversee those airlines, to oversee their risk management systems and such. And there's less and less shipper investigations by FAA. I think FAA really needs to refocus on shipper investigations, particularly when it involves lithium batteries. And I'm sure that Stefan, I wasn't able to attend the whole meeting today, but talked about the people who are shipping at states of charge greater than what's required by the regulations. So I'm all for enforcement. I think the data shows that we need to do a better job in enforcement. I just wanted to comment on the IHIP, because Dwayne, maybe you're not as familiar with that because that's not in your your focus as international standards coordinator, but that does exist, and it's a way that drives the inspectors to do inspections. And if there's an incident involving lithium batteries, that should come up to the top. It should be a high priority, and we should investigate every single one. And then also, it should be a root cause analysis so we understand what actually occurred, so that we can make intelligent decisions on how, if we need to change the regulations, how do we do that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. No question. Go ahead.
All right, moving on, and Dwayne, I do want to say, you made a comment about, or asked a question about us providing, would this subcommittee look at trying to provide additional information? And I think George will actually talk about that, at least with the retail groups and others where he's worked with them on their websites and their information. So I do want to spend a little bit of time here because this has got some of attention today about the certification programs. So the subcommittee, actually over a year and a half ago, we did have IATA, the Lithium Battery Center for Excellence Independent Validation, I think I've got that right, give us a presentation. They talked about their program, which was really focused on, does the shipper understand the regulations? And it was somehow validating that the shipper, was properly trained. And then as Captain Brown mentioned, in the last meeting, Underwriters Laboratory came in and discussed their program specifically with their customer. And since then, they have forwarded their draft certification criteria, if you will, which I forwarded out to the whole committee. We discussed this at the subcommittee level. We reviewed it. There were no objections to how UL was going about certifying these particular entities, and I say entities because it's not necessarily just the shipper. There was some discussion about, well, I'm going to say this both ways. There's one line up there that says there was discussion about being optional, but we also had comments about it's not going to be effective if not everybody's not doing it. So again, I think there's, within the subcommittee, considering the makeup of the subcommittee, there's some differences of opinion on, is this needed, is it not needed? Obviously, we have manufacturers that are doing all of the things that are already part of the UL certification program. There was also questions about, well, if you do this, what's the airline going to do? How does the airline provide any easement, quicker transaction, whatever it may be, because you're certified? And I could only answer for one airline, but there's not a lot for us to do. It's really based on each individual airline's program and how it functions. But again, when you compare it to the IATA program, it is a deeper dive. So it is going back. It is looking at the product itself, the UN 38.3 testing, quality management systems that are in place, and really on-site inspections. So I think there is more to it. So I think, again, from this subcommittee for this particular meeting, there's no objections to that program. Is it something that should be required? We didn't have consensus on that. To the next point, e-commerce marketplaces. Again, we do talk about, and this is, I'm sorry, I said George was going to say it, but I guess I'm going to say it, that the confidence is lower, that third-party sellers understand all of the requirements, all the battery information. Industry seller and seller education recommended. So PIRBA has contacted retail and electronic associations, reviewed websites for accuracy and consistency. So thank you to PIRBA for that effort. And I will say, in an ongoing effort, it's been there for quite a while, is many of the air carriers do post the PHMSA information regarding the safe transport of batteries, the FAA information regarding safe transport of batteries, which is an effort that the FAA pushed several years ago. And George, I'm going to just skip to my slide so you can just stand up here and read them all after that. So, we've already talked about state of charge today, but I just want to give you this particular perspective from one particular air carrier that I know well. Me, okay. The carrier that I stayed anonymous for about 3 seconds, didn't I? So we've had 6 UN 3480 lithium battery incidents since 2020. In 3 of those cases, we were able to get, either requested by the regulator or on our own, able to get additional information regarding those particular batteries, meaning we could do a more in-depth investigation. So in 2 cases, they went to the FAA and one to an outside testing agency. In all 3 of those cases, so again, 3 of 6 incidents where we were able to test. In all 3 of those situations, we had non-compliance with state of charge. So all I'm trying to say is I wanted to make sure that this information was known. We do appreciate when the regulator asks for us to take an additional step and send a battery or a shipment to their location for additional testing. And in some cases, they've helped define or clear the transport issues associated with that. I know David talked about that a little bit earlier and the concerns there. So, but again, this point is to reiterate that in actual incidents experienced with this carrier, when 3 of those shipments were provided to the agency or an outside testing company, state of charge compliance, non-compliance was found. Now, George, I think I'm going to let you come up and talk now. Okay. If there's another slide for me, I'll come back.
All right, sir. Thank you. So one of the things we talked about within our subcommittee is the efforts that are being made at the local level, state level, international level on promoting repurpose, reuse of lithium-ion batteries and electronic equipment. So obviously a concern from a safety standpoint in some cases. Having said that, there are some very, very sophisticated companies out there doing this work and doing it safely in full compliance with the hazmat regulations, but also recognize that this is one of the challenges we see in that we've got the U.S. Department of Transportation, ICAO, IMO, et cetera, looking at tightening up the regulations on lithium batteries, and then drafting regulations with that in consideration. Okay, what's happening in the real world in terms of the issue of repurpose, reuse of batteries and portable electronic equipment. So repurpose and reuse, just so you know what this is all about. So repurpose is generally defined as taking a lithium-ion battery that was used in one application and repurposing it and using it in another application. Reuse is simply taking that battery and reusing it in the same application. So we're seeing a lot of that in batteries, electronic devices, e-bikes, et cetera. And there are actually 27 states this year that introduced right to repair legislation. So that gives the consumer the right to essentially open up a notebook, tablet, cell phone that does not have an easily removable battery and replace the battery themselves, for example. And that there are some very good programs out there that allow for that. But at the same time, with the way some of this legislation is written, it essentially gives the consumers the keys to essentially modify that device, extract the battery, trust the consumer can install the battery safely, close it back up, and then use it and possibly bring it onto an aircraft with them. So we've got this push and pull between giving consumers the ability to repair their products, and then we've got legislation tightening up the regulations on the shipping of these products and how they can be transported and whether they can be brought on passenger aircraft. New York City is front and center on this issue. They've had a lot of problems with e-bikes, low-quality batteries, low-quality e-bikes, but at the same time, individuals who are operating courier services, modifying their batteries and trying to repair their own batteries, and we've seen a lot of fires as a result of that. The state of Washington is another example where the state is on the cusp of passing, or the governor actually is, we're waiting for the governor to sign this battery collection and recycling bill, which we generally supported. But within that legislation, they put a battery management hierarchy where they are mandating that, in this order, waste prevention and reduction, reuse, and then at the end, when nothing else can be done, recycle it. So here's a situation where by legislation and eventually by law, you'll be mandated to, take a look at that battery, and the first thing you need to think of is, waste reduction and prevention, but before you get to the recycling, it's like, can I reuse that battery? Can I reuse that product? So again, that'll be mandated by law once Washington passes this, or once the governor signs that bill, which should happen within the next 3 weeks. In Europe, if you've for those of you that have been tracking this, their batteries regulation that they've been working on for about 4 or 5 years now, they're updating that, and it's probably the most comprehensive extended producer responsibility law or regulation that you will see anywhere in the world. And in there as well, they are promoting the idea of reuse and repurposing and secondary use as well. So this 342-page document it's a pretty impressive document. There's no question about it. But again, that's another area. Well, this will be mandated within the EU about, again, repurposing and reusing batteries before recycling. And last but not least, because these issues are evolving both here in the U.S. and as well as internationally, just a reminder that PRBA and our counterpart over in Europe, Recharge, we are developing papers. We submitted a couple papers already to the UN subcommittee on dangerous goods about trying to define repurpose reuse within the UN model regulations and how it affects compliance with UN 38.3 testing requirements. Right now, we're in the very, very early stages of that. We're at a new biennium this year. We've got 4 meetings to work through that, but we've had a couple working group meetings that I've chaired. And there's a lot of interest from everybody, from the battery companies and electronic device manufacturers in Asia and Europe, here in the U.S. So a lot of interest in how we can incorporate this issue, define repurpose, reuse in the model regulations, which would be an absolute complete change for the model regulations to take that into consideration. But that, to us, is very important to make sure we understand if you are going to repurpose that battery or reuse that battery and you modify that design from the original design, the UN 38.3 testing requirements kick in. That's our job with this work that we're doing at the UN and this paper we're putting together. Nobody said it was going to be easy, and that's going to take a little time for sure. One of the other areas where we see, I'll say, some confusion and maybe a little frustration on the part of the legislators and the regulators that we work with is how battery companies are labeling their products and also the electronic devices. So we've seen some of the battery collection and recycling legislation include certain markings and labeling requirements. We know the dangerous goods regulations require the watt-hour marking. In Europe, they require a crossed-out wheelie bin to convey that it shouldn't be thrown in the trash and it has to be recycled. The crossed-out wheelie bin here in the United States means it causes probably more confusion than anything else when you talk to the legislators and talk to consumers about that as well. So what we're seeing is, again, trying to convey a message to consumers and others about when you go to purchase that product, what's the label that you see? What's the safety issue associated with this product? When you purchase it, and then when you're handling it, when you charge it, and eventually when you go to recycle it, how's that information conveyed? And then, of course, when you get to the airport and you hear information about, okay, don't put your batteries in your checked luggage. What about electronic devices? Can you put those in checked luggage? So there's a lot of confusion there. And I think there's some inconsistent messages coming across from these different regulatory schemes and regulatory bodies. So I think for our subcommittee, I think what we're trying to do is can we, as a subcommittee, reach out to various entities and try to convey the same consistent safety message when it comes to lithium batteries. So if you go to PRBA's website or CTA's website or OPEI's website, we're all pulling up the same information about the safe transport and handling of batteries. And so that's what we're trying to come up with, again, that same consistent message across the board. But the challenge we have, of course, is you've got local, state, national, and international legislative and regulatory activities that we're running into that convey inconsistent messages. So I think that's I'm going to say a long-term project for this group, but I think that's one of the things that we're going to try to tackle here in the next 6 months. Okay, that's Bob's. Okay. So one area I'm going to kind of put PHMSA and FAA on the spot here, and I probably should have told you this before, but one of the things that our members are a little confused about, and it can't just be our members, and I'm sure there's others out there, and I put together a couple slides on this, and it goes to the regulations that have been adopted recently here at 49 CFR, as well as at the international level for battery tracking devices, whether it's for data loggers or for your baggage or whatever it might be. there's regulations here in 49 CFR that don't seem to be consistent with what's authorized under ICAO and the IATA dangerous goods regulations. Then, of course, we have the requirements for shipping by vessel as well. So what I did, and again, this is, it's not an answer I need today, but I think it would help us as an association of a lot of battery manufacturers and product manufacturers who either use data loggers or they manufacture the batteries for those data loggers to get some clarification for the industry about how the regulations apply to, for example, if I was going to put a data tracker on my pallet of batteries that I'm putting in the air, the way I understand it, and this goes to the next slide, under 49 CFR, I don't believe you're authorized to do that under 49 CFR unless they're COVID-19 pharmaceuticals. Under IATA and ICAO, I believe you are authorized to use batteries up to 100 watt hours, for example, as long as they meet certain RTCA or EASA standards and you meet another couple of requirements. So it's an ask to the agencies if we can get some clarification either through some guidance, like you've done some really nice work with batteries, on this issue about data loggers, tracking devices. We know, for example, and I've got one of these, for tracking your luggage, you can put it in, you can put one of those luggage tracking devices, as long as it doesn't exceed 2.7 watt hours or has more than 0.3 grams of lithium metal, on my luggage, I can offer that, I can check that, and we're good to go. I think that's good to go internationally now. But when it comes to tracking devices for large consignments, we're all a little bit confused between what 49 CFR authorizes and what ICAO authorizes. So I think for us, from a safety standpoint and cargo transport and so forth, so it's an ask to the agencies, if you can come up with some clarification, some guidance document, can't imagine it'd be more than a page and a half, that would be very helpful. So that's my ask to the two agencies. So, and I think that's all I've got. Questions?
Dick raises.
Yeah, Dick Hill, FAA. I think if you saw Ben Supko's talk this morning on the Cargo Executive Committee prioritizations, one of the groups that's going to be formed to look at one of the priorities was on active devices in inaccessible areas, which includes trackers, loggers, refrigerated containers, and other things. And I think it's one of the areas where technology has outdriven the regulations and requirements, where those regulations presently mainly are based on the transport of cargo and our packaging requirements. And a lot of those may fall under the aircraft, especially trackers and loggers, where they put off electronic signals which may interfere. So there are other things besides just carrying lithium batteries. So the intent is to put together a working group within the FAA across the business lines to address those issues. And yes, one of the things that may come out of it would be additional guidance on what you can and cannot carry in what areas and what, or maybe a recommendation to change some of those requirements, maybe put them in airworthiness requirements rather than packaging requirements. So that working group would be tasked with doing just what you said you would like, and is underway as we speak.
Government's here, they're excellent. I'm glad to see that's happening. So just to make sure I'm clear, though, again, not to put you on the spot, is it under 49 CFR right now, you're not authorized to place a data logger on a piece of, let's say, a pallet of whatever, it could be a pallet of toilet paper, right? So, and if I put that in the air under 49 CFR today, that's not authorized. Is that correct? So,
I don't know. You know, Jamie?
Go ahead.
It is, but under the current advisory circular for those sort of things, it has to be approved by each airline's engineering office.
okay.
And we've got a guidance that we have to follow, both from a DG standpoint and, as Dick mentioned, no electronic magnetic interference,
Right.
and that has to be ruled out. And then at that point, then each specific airline has to go over it with their whole fleet. So even though we might approve it, that doesn't give anybody else the authorization to, even if they have the same aircraft type. So it is possible, but it's somewhat time-consuming.
Okay. And that's under 49 CFR.
Well, no, it's really under Advisory Circular
Okay,
9121-1D, I think.
gotcha. All right.
I see a question from Jim Shepard.
Yeah, sorry, yes, I just been triggered a thought on this topic. So as a large, so I'm an operations guy, as opposed to a regulatory expert, but I'll share the perspective from an operations guy, that the perspective on tracking and monitoring products from factory all the way through to the consumer is kind of an emerging hot topic. To keep inventory levels low, if you know exactly where individual items are, people are adopting tracking technologies at a high speed. And historically, that's been focused at pallet level, but the technology's dropped so much in price, you can now start looking at it master carton, which could be 5 or 10 products or individual units. So industry as a whole, and the more SKUs you have, you're managing, the more you want this kind of technology. So it's probably an emerging issue should get tackled relatively quickly, because people are going to adopt the technology. Some of them are active trackers, and some of them are passive trackers that only work when pinged, and there's low risk from this committee's point of view. But people are moving quickly in this area.
Thanks, Tim. Understand.
Respond? Okay. All right.
It's not based on this topic, so.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to get back to, this forum's generally not a good one to debate, the interpretations of the regulations at the moment. And you've identified there's some tentacles here, and I think we've both heard the regs may not cover all of them adequately. However, what I would offer is certainly we answer anything you provide us in writing. If you want to ask us for an interp letter, please do so. We'll go through, we can tell you the state of play, what the regs say today, because the regs say what they say. And so we can get that to you. If there's gaps in what you're doing that aren't covered, then that's where we move next after that.
Thanks, Dwayne. No, I think that was going to be our next step. And really what triggered this was ICAO's and IATA's recent adoption of the baggage tracking devices, right, that allow for, the small coin cells and the small lithium ion coin, well, both metal and ion, on putting those in with your checked luggage, right, which was great. Again, I'm a big believer in them. I got them on my keys and everything. But anyway, that for some reason, as soon as that came out and I circulated that to the members, someone said, well, why can't I put this on, my luggage or my cargo that I'm tracking, for example? Because again, if it's okay for luggage, why can't I just put it on a few boxes that I'm going to ship to make sure I can track it? I said, I don't know the answer to that question. So again, I appreciate the fact that this is not the forum to get into the weeds of interpretations and that type of thing. But to Dick's point, the fact that they're working on this, I think the timing is good. So it's, so I'm glad I brought it up. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, George. Dave Roth, UL.
David Roth, UL Standards and Engagement. Two-part question for you, George, back on the repurposing of batteries. And the question is, are you aware if any of those efforts on repurposing specifically are referencing the standards that already exist on evaluation of batteries for repurposing? And then the second part of the question would be, is that something that we, UL, as writer of the standards, should be pursuing with those jurisdictions?
I don't believe they are. I haven't seen that in any of the state legislation that we've been tracking. I'm trying to think of some others. Like if you look at the New York legislation that actually got signed into law that prohibits the sale of reused or repurposed batteries, which is about as far reaching as it can go. That would be, and again, I've never seen any UL standards cited there except for testing to micro-mobility devices and that type of thing, but that's the finished product. So, no, it's a good question.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple slides back, there was some reference to PRBA's review of guidance material on retail websites.
Yep.
But we didn't talk much about that, did we, or did I miss it?
Nope, I can go back to that one.
And can you explain that a little bit?
Yep.
And while you're getting back to that, Reason I'm being is I want to start talking to
sorry,
maybe
Roman.
Bob and some others on how we capture some of these great initiatives. Maybe not done as part of your subcommittee, but coming through your subcommittee and use that as a way to advocate for the great work of this committee, right? We've heard some other things that what the trip data is being used for, and what most people see is just a very generic, report or, 500 pages of transcript that nobody's going to read through. But if there's some way for us to better highlight some of these success stories, I think before this ends in 2 years, we ought to find a way to do that.
So what we were tasked with and what ended up going out and doing is finding, initially, the first step in the process was like, okay, what is out there? What's the information that's readily available to anybody that wants to learn about shipping lithium batteries? I mean, I get calls all the time. I said, I got your name, George, from so-and-so. You seem to understand this issue. I've got, an inch thick of binder material here that I've downloaded from the internet from all these different sources, and I'm still completely confused. So what I ended up initially doing was I went out and I found 2 or 3 or 4 websites that I thought, okay, this is very concise, it's consistent, and I think that was in one of our reports previously. And then I went out to some of the major trade associations that we work with here in Washington, D.C., and I said, tell me what you tell your members, or tell me what's on your website about shipping lithium batteries. And these are the electronics manufacturers associations and the retail associations, and some of it is really, really good. Nothing wrong. It's just presented in a different format, right? And so getting back to, okay, what's the goal here? The goal here is a consistent message in terms of state of charge issues, shipping by ground, shipping by air, whatever it might be, and trying to convey literally the consistent information about compliance with the regulations and safety. So if you go to our website, if you go to OPEI's website or PTI's website or CTA's or whoever it might be, or RELA, you're going to find great information on safety and recycling and transport. But again, we all have our own little niches, and we've all drafted the information a little bit differently. It's all right, it's all correct and accurate, but I think what we're hoping to do is, with this subcommittee, is, okay, can we draft something concise that everybody can put on their website, that so when you go to our website or OPEI's or CTA's or whoever, it's the same document, right? And it's going to point you to the same 3 websites for more information or something like that. So that was our ultimate goal in my reaching out to the different associations and looking to see what's out there on the web. And again, PHMSA has done a phenomenal job with their guidance document, the most recent one you put out. But again, it's a 15-page document, right? And it's very comprehensive and it's accurate. But a lot of people you're gonna lose them after the 3rd page. That's the thing. But that's the biggest challenge we have, and it goes to the whole labeling issue as well. Conveying that same consistent information through some type of label, whether it's for recycling, disposal, safety, whatever it might be.
Thank you. Stefan Rossetti has a question.
Yeah, Stefan Rossetti, Medtronic. And along the same lines, and that made me think that during my intervention earlier on awareness, outreach, and education, and actually seeing hazardous mat right in here. Just show hazardous mat so everyone knows what I'm talking about here. I just wanted, and I forgot to say it, I had it on my slide, I forgot to say, but I just wanted to point out the amazing information that both PHMSA and FAA have on their website, and I think it's important for everyone to know that there are documents, there are things out there. We just need to make sure they are utilized correctly. And just on my note here, I shamelessly stole them for my own Dangerous Good program. So thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Any other questions for George before we take a break? Seeing none, we're going to take a 30-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 3:30. Thank you. Okay, it's 3:30. We're going to start again. The next item on the agenda are subcommittee reports and next steps. The Hazardous Analysis Subcommittee. Well, each one of us is a member of the Hazardous Analysis Subcommittee, but we have a special guest today, Jamie Lessard from the FAA, who's going to talk about a new bulletin that's been issued by the FAA. It's Special Airworthiness Bulletin 2023-06. So, Jamie, thank you very much for being here today. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
All right, thank you, Bob. As Bob said, my name is Jamie Lessard. I work for the FAA's Aircraft Certification Service. I was asked today to come and provide an overview of our Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin that my division recently released about 2 weeks ago, and it's titled Risk of Uncontrolled Fire Incidents Caused by Aircraft Cargo. And it's working. Okay, so today I'll just give a quick overview. I'll explain what actually an SAIB is, why the FAA decided to issue one. I'll provide an overview of the recommendations that are contained within 2023-06, and I'll share some relevant links and my contact information. Okay. So what is an SAIB? The FAA uses these bulletins to alert, educate, and make recommendations to the aviation community about ways to improve safety. The target audience may be narrow or broad. In this instance, our audience can be considered somewhat broad, given the supply chain issues that some people have spoken about today that are involved in the safe transport of cargo, and that there's several facets to that. And also, designers right now are currently hard at work designing better packaging and fire suppression ideas in committees, which I'll talk about later. We draw the distinction in this document that ultimately the operator is responsible for both understanding the capabilities and limitations of aircraft cargo compartments, and to consider this information when deciding what to load in those compartments. SAIBs contain non-regulatory, non-mandatory information and guidance for safety issues that do not meet the criteria for an airworthiness directive, and that's outlined in 14 CFR Part 39. And we also have an order that's more directed at FAA employees for how to write these documents. So we had a few reasons for developing this particular SAIB. First, we wanted to reiterate the risk of uncontrollable cargo fire incidents to a broader audience. Many of us, like Dakhil, myself, we participate in many committees such as consensus standards meetings, research forums, and safety teams. But we saw value in providing guidance at this time in this format to summarize the work that's being conducted in some of those same spaces. We also wanted to reinforce that an operator should understand the capabilities and limits, like I mentioned on the prior slide, and then to give them some information that they should consider when conducting their cargo-specific risk assessments and making decisions about what cargo to carry. We've also been corresponding with the NTSB for quite a long time on a series of safety recommendations that are shown on the slide. And this SAIB reinforces our commitment to the goals outlined by the NTSB. These goals include improving detection times that originate within palletized and unitized cargo, improving the fire resistance of cargo containers and covers, and developing standards for active fire suppression within containers and perhaps packaging. I noticed that the slide does say require active fire suppression. That was the term the NTSB used, but again, we're trying to meet them halfway with developing standards and writing this SAIB. So there are, I think, 7 recommendations in this document. The first one states the importance of retaining or including Class C cargo compartments on all cargo aircraft. Class C cargo compartments are required to have a built-in fire extinguishing or suppression system that's controllable from the cockpit. Class E cargo compartments are not required to have this built-in system. These are typically the upper deck of cargo freighters and are allowed on cargo aircraft. They do have a means to shut off airflow to reduce the oxygen content in the compartment. However, these procedures can take minutes to accomplish, during which time the fire may grow and reignite. So given the Class C compartment provides superior protection against fire propagation and reignition, the FAA recommends retaining Class C cargo compartments where they already exist, and where there is an option, such as a new aircraft purchase, to include them in the aircraft for the new order. Second recommendation, in 2021, we provided guidance in an AC on the safety risk management of items carried in cargo compartments. The document provides information to assist with a cargo-specific risk assessment when carrying hazardous items in general, yet we provided some attention in this AC to describing the hazards and associated risks of carrying lithium batteries specifically. This AC provides some of the same information actually that's in the SAIB, but it expands on various concepts further and provides a helpful overview of aircraft design features and cargo compartments that protect the aircraft and passengers in the event of a fire. And I was just rereading that AC the other night, and it provides a really good summary of cargo compartments too, which sometimes I still stumble on. So that's on the second to last page of that AC. Third recommendation, we ask operators and others to consider the information provided at two websites that Ben Supko probably mentioned this morning. One provides high-level guidance and is on our FAA.gov page. I actually am the author of that website at the moment, so if you have any feedback to it, let me know. The other is maintained and designed by the FAA Technical Center. They have also created a task group that updates that site regularly, and they're always soliciting input to that website. Fourth recommendation, the FAA encourages the use and implementation of fire-resistant containers as a risk mitigation for certain fires. The testing requirements are determined by a consensus body, SAE AGE2 Air Cargo. Just got some questions during the break on that, so that's the committee working on those technologies. The first iteration of this standard was published in 2020, and that includes requirements to test the container by generating a Class A fire inside of it. This fire is still a robust fire, but industry and regulators recognize the need to develop some additional challenges for these devices, and that would include, of course, incorporating some batteries and perhaps other hazardous materials. This committee is just underway on this work, so it's a good time to join it, and they're going to be updating this document. AS8992 is the number. Borrowing UPS's famous container here, but this is just a picture of what a typical fire-resistant container might look like. The panels are often made of special materials, which have the dual nature of both providing fire containment, but they're also usually or often more durable and have a longer service life. Currently, operators are employing these types of things on a voluntary basis. It's not regulatory. But again, using this type of a container, we'd expect that you're including that in your cargo risk assessment and you understand what you're employing in your fleet. Recommendation 5 is going to look a lot similar to the fire-resistant containers. These are fire containment covers. They have their own standard, and we're going to be updating that standard once we design these challenge fires that I mentioned for the fire-resistant containers. And sorry, I forgot to mention, but in both cases, the FAA's underway with the Technical Center at conducting some research to support this committee, SAE AGE2, and their work. Then here's a picture of a typical fire containment cover. Similarly, they're obviously designed with special materials, starve the fire of oxygen, and they're often used in Class E cargo compartments. They're considered a risk mitigation for certain fires, even beyond Class A fires, and they're currently used on a voluntary basis. And I forgot to mention, but for both of these devices, we do have an associated TSO. That's a technical standard order, and the FAA writes those standards typically for aircraft parts. So it shows that in this case, because we've written TSOs for these devices, we think they're very important. And in order to get that TSO placard and that approval, there's extra rigor to that. You know, you're not just self-certifying these devices, you're actually taking your data to the FAA, and we give you the approval to design and produce these devices. So the TSO program gives us all a little bit more oversight and rigor. Recommendation 6, participate in the forums that I mentioned, which is AGE2 Air Cargo, where we're designing these two devices I showed pictures of today. Also, as most of you already know, of course, G27. Also, Underwriter Laboratories is just starting a brand-new standard for active fire suppression instead of passive. Those two technologies I showed you minutes ago were considered passive. So active is slightly different. I'm not quite sure if this will just be for containers or if they're going to find some technologies for even palletized cargo or under a cover. I don't know yet. We actually haven't started, but we'll find out. And the last recommendation, this is our commercial aviation safety team. It's co-chaired with a FAA employee and also somebody from industry. And they've given a lot of attention and focus to the importance of cargo and these optional safety enhancements and all the research that backs these up. So if you want to read more about their work and, again, some of these specific enhancements, I put the link here. And those would be SE 127 and then 223 through 226. They're composed of a mixture of technology implementation, research, suggestions, standard suggestions, and these are tracked. I think the operators get some type of credit when they prove that they've been implementing these safety enhancements. Some of the links I mentioned, there's the SAE AGE2, there's a fire safety specific, a little more detailed website, there's the higher level FAA website, the FAA.gov. Those are all cargo safety specific. And then I actually, since I'm mentioning Underwriter Labs, and we don't think we have our website set up yet, but I put an email address for the person who is coordinating that committee and then also still taking membership requests, I think, for that committee. And her name's Susan Malone. And then there's my email address. So any questions?
I got a question and a comment. So on that recommendation 1, to retain the Class C compartments, lower deck. So some freight operators buy and repurpose, passenger airplanes, and they, which came with a Class C compartment for the lower deck, and they take that equipment out. Is that something that, I'm encouraging you to, yes, keep it in there, but there are freight operators that are doing that. Are you saying kind of like from this point forward, it would be a bad idea to do that?
It's not a regulation, but that's why we're trying to use this format to suggest this. We have heard feedback from some of the unions that this was occurring, so we were just trying to express that it is safer to retain them, but there's no regulation saying you have to retain them.
Okay. And then I have a question about the challenge fires. Love it. Love that you guys are doing that. But I'm trying to think, how do you start that, right? So let's say, so as an example, for our ULDs, we'll do a Class A fire load, right? Paper, shredded paper, cardboard boxes. How do you begin to figure out the challenge fire for lithium batteries? How would you do that, do you think?
Well, I'll let Dick answer.
Well, I know about the chemicals, but do you start with a balloon or do you start with 100 balloons?
We have been gathering operator data through IATA and some of the attendees at SAE for designing the challenge fire. If you're talking about physically how to literally start it, that's definitely a Dick Hill question. But if you mean designing the entire fire, that's all the debate we're embarking on, because there is debate. It's not really a quick conversation.
Yeah. But you're kind of gathering load data from other operators to go.
Absolutely.
Say how many batteries are on this airplane or whatever. Okay, that makes sense.
We are. And then there's even people at the meetings that have tested and already have some testing data to share. So I think we've had 2 or 3 meetings so far. But it usually takes a good 6 months, I think. We're trying to learn some lessons learned from past committees and get this moving a little quicker. But it's going to take some time to develop consensus.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, I'm glad you're
Controversial
doing what you're
topic.
doing. It is controversial because we've done a lot of that testing and, what's the right number of batteries to put in?
Right.
And I like what you're saying, how you can't get batteries, so use the gas. That makes perfect sense.
And also just what's possible. There's some amount of batteries that's going to be a tipping point, and the container can't succeed in
Right,
suppressing it.
right. Are there any other questions for Jamie or any comments? George?
So I missed the pre-meeting yesterday, and I thought I heard Dick say something about some of the other airlines that are currently using the fire-resistant containers. I'm very familiar with UPSs. Are there a lot of the airlines moving in that direction? Just curious. I thought I heard you say something yesterday about that, but I may have misunderstood you. Do you know?
I know globally there is, and of course, UPS is one of the ones I'm most familiar with as well.
Okay.
Because they actually helped write that standard. They were learning from their own implementation.
Right. You don't know.
Sure.
And I guess my second part of that question is, does Europe have anything equivalent to this? That, like the work that you're doing here, is anything happening over in Europe that we're?
Yeah, they partner with us, and usually once we write a TSO, they implement the same TSO.
They do, okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, they're very involved.
Thanks.
Yes, Tim?
Actually, George, let me kind of help answer. This is Tim from Samsung on that topic. So those unit loading devices work very well for small packages, because you can fit them in, stack them, and use the volume up and cube it out really well. They don't work if you're shipping bulkier items. Then you're looking at looking at the containment blanket type approach strategy, or
The
you're
covers.
doing nothing, and you're just actually just topping it out so it doesn't get wet on the tarmac. So those are the kind of the three paths people take, and it really depends on what you're shipping as to how you can use these solutions.
And there are operators that use an aircraft suppression system even in Class E. So they don't use the FRCs because they actually have an aircraft suppression system that punctures the container. Yeah. Right. Anything
I think
else?
it's a good move for the industry to kind of, begin to address this. We had a carrier come to us, they fly a 747 from Hong Kong to Europe with 200,000 pounds of batteries completely unprotected. And so they're like, well, what do you guys do? And not that they did anything different, they still do it that way, but I think it's good to start putting a little bit of a spotlight on this for protection, for mitigation.
Absolutely. We discuss in the AC I mentioned on, let's see, which slide? The 120-121. There's a paragraph in there about ICAO, but ICAO has driven this need for a cargo-specific risk assessment. And ever since they published that document, 10102, which is again, sorry, there's a whole string of documents here, but it's mentioned in this AC, we did see a lot more questions about doing cargo risk assessments and these devices. So we're seeing progress ever since that ICAO document was released.
Scott Schwartz?
In response to George's question, over the past 10 years or so, airlines around the world have adopted these devices on certain trade lanes and certain airplanes. Some of them discontinued the use, some continued the use. Domestically, I don't know how many airlines are using them. I don't think it's a very high percentage. They are weight, which increases cost of transport. It reduces the utility of the airplane because you can't put as much cargo on the airplane when you use them. And it takes time and effort to install them. And depending on how time sensitive your operation is, it can add minutes to flights that are very, very, very time sensitive, as in thousands of dollars per minute late if they're at their destination in some cases. So these are all factors that go into whether carriers will use them. I think if you poll the carriers, you'll find that many of them don't use them. Let me just put it that way. And I'm talking mainly for the all cargo carriers. I don't know if the passenger carriers are using them. I don't think they're in frequent use in passenger carriers. And you can look out the window when you fly and look at the cargo as they go by, and you can see whether it's clear plastic on the pallets that they're loading in the bellies. You can't tell if they're whether the containers are fire resistant, but you can tell usually if they're made out of aluminum or not.
Well, the bellies do have halon, and I think so far the push for these devices is for the Class E cargo compartments. There can be some, we're still doing research, and there can be some complications in using them in a Class C that we just want to tease out, I think, before we formally would recommend them. But right now, we're more focused on Class E.
think one,
Anecdotally, I was sitting on a plane headed to Detroit the other day, and I'm sitting, looking out the window, and they're loading the baggage, and I see some boxes going on, and lo and behold, there's this Class 9 label in this fiberboard box going to this passenger aircraft. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm just kidding, I didn't say that, no. It was not the Class 9 lithium battery label, though, okay.
Great with airbags.
So I was just comment on Scott's comment there. I know there are certain lanes where the airlines will use the fire containment covers and the ULDs, right? But maybe a question for Tim, you know, as a large shipper of these devices, that's not something that you as the shipper do, that's all done at the airport, right? That's up to the airline to do, right?
Yeah, in actual fact, it's more likely up to the combination of the freight forward and who's authorized to build out the pallets before they get loaded on the plane. So that could be under the direction of the freight forwarder, or it could be the ground handling crew that are building up the pallets and the airline's requirements.
But you as the shipper never know, for example, that they're gonna, you don't know ahead of time, that they're, a lot of times you don't know what airline you're gonna use, right?
We actually, yes, we do know most of the time.
Okay.
So we have so generally, large shippers will have a relationship with certain brokers and freight forwarders rather, and therefore you'll know which are your preferred airlines, and it's very likely you've pre-negotiated certain capacity and volumes on those aircraft, and based on the schedules. And so yeah, you have a very good idea of what you think is going to happen.
Okay.
But the actual work itself, you're not, as a shipper, you're not directing that.
I think one of the challenges is going to be people like a UPS or a FedEx, they own their own containers, and a lot of the other cargo companies, don't they kind of interline their containers through like a leasing company? They don't really own them, they just lease them, so that'll be a challenge, I would think.
Yes, definitely.
To get that in. Scott?
Yeah, even though a lot of airlines may own their own containers, apparently overseas, it's harder to control the possession of those containers, let's say. So we have different kinds of containers. We have some that we use specifically for dangerous goods, but they don't use them as much overseas because they tend to get lost.
Thanks.
Interesting.
Put a tracker on them.
I was going to say, I wasn't going to say it. But
Any other questions for Jamie? Jamie, we appreciate you being here today. Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much for
much.
the presentation, explaining that.
And the trackers are the forwarders on the fritz.
Okay, thanks. And next on the agenda, we have UN scope proposals. Dwayne? would you-
I think Steve's going to take that for us.
Okay, yes, that's right. Thank you.
Well, the slide is on my screen in the back, and I can move it. It's just not up here. Give me 1 second. No. Very interesting, thank you. Yeah, and we got through this. Wow. Okay. Hey, here we go. Nope, that's Dwayne. What is going on? One more time, and then I'm just going to wing it.
Okay, this is that one. Uh-huh. Okay, should be right after this. Okay, hey, everybody. Steve Webb with PHMSA's international program, and I'm going to give you, it says a UN update. It'll be a little bit more of an international update because we'll talk about the UN, but also the upcoming ICAO session to give you a little flavor of proposals that are on the agenda for both of these meetings. The last session, the 61st session of the UN Subcommittee of Experts on the Transport of Dangerous Goods, wrapped up in December of 2022, finished a two-year biennium, 21 and 22. The most relevant topic for this committee is the creation or addition of 3 new shipping names, proper shipping names for vehicles, specifically ones powered by lithium-ion batteries, lithium metal batteries, and sodium-ion battery powered. There's some discussion whether a few of those are even practical or in use, but however, these 3 shipping descriptions were approved, and the new special provision for XY does have a number. Didn't assign it up here on the screen for you, but those were approved by the UN, and the modes are in the process of adopting these shipping descriptions and the appropriate transport provisions now. So IMO has taken one sort of crack at it. ICAO will do so in their next 2 meetings and try and bring in any associated transport provisions for these new 3 entries. And what that does is really twofold. I think it was Dwayne mentioned, or maybe it was Dick, that in the air world, vehicles, yes, it means cars, but also in all modes, but specifically in the air mode, you see a lot of packaged vehicles, bikes and scooters, hoverboards, things like that. So it allows for some perhaps targeted hazard communication requirements to be applied to the new shipping descriptions. So you have hazard communication where it's appropriate in packaged form, but perhaps not on a car, where a label does a little bit less good. And then it also allows you to target emergency response information through tools like the ERG guide, the EMS guide for IMO, things like that, with more appropriate shipping descriptions. So the 62nd session will be in July. We'll start a brand new biennium. Meeting papers are still coming up. I told some of you yesterday that they were done. They're still popping up. In fact, a few showed up today. They were quite busy today. There are 2 lithium battery issues on the agenda for the meeting. The first is paper 10 from China, and their proposal is to require the lithium battery handling mark to be on the same surface as the other required markings, so proper shipping name, things that are required under 5.2. These are all really new, posted in the last 7 days or so we don't have a lot of thoughts yet necessarily on our positions. We host public meetings for all of our UN meetings as well as for the ICAO sessions, so we welcome any feedback either before those public meetings through email or certainly attendance in our public meetings to sort of hear our thoughts on the issue once we've had a chance to run it through the system and come up to it. But, and there's a second paper which just posted while we were here in this session today, and that's from MDTC on the creation of 4 new entries, UN entries for medical devices containing batteries of all sorts, lithium and metal and ion, either standalone or in equipment. And I think that's going to come around a little bit when we talk about the future of work, Stefan, so I don't know if we can hold that discussion until there, but I can give you a second if you like.
Yeah, Stefan Rossetti, Medtronic. So there's no proposal on the table today with that paper. It is to generate a discussion about 4 new UN number for medical devices.
Yeah, I looked at it, and it gives regulatory text because often we need to see that, right? Just as something to look at as a guide, but isn't actually asking for a decision, of course. It's asking for the committee to talk about the concept of these new entries and whether that's useful, important, something we wanted to consider, right?
Correct.
Okay. So we'll look at that. That's paper 15, I believe, 2023-15 for those keeping score at home. I'm mostly just glad they didn't make me wear the hazardous mat suit. That's pretty much the only thing that I was worried about. ICAO will be in Rio this year. I'm not sure how they pulled that one off, but they are in Rio, not in Canada this year, and the meeting will be May the 15th through the 19th. PHMSA will have a public meeting on May the 3rd. You can find that information on our international program website. Please dial in if you feel so inclined to provide some inputs or hear from us. Really only one paper I thought was worth noting for this group on batteries, and that's working paper 4 from IATA. And it is a paper that proposes to require vehicles, battery-powered vehicles, to be shipped at an indicated state of charge of 25%. So you turn the key, you press the button, your dashboard says 25%. Now, we know that doesn't mean the battery is at 25%. That means that the indicator is showing 25%. Battery could be plus or minus insert percentage, 10%. But that is the proposal at this time. It's a carry-on of another proposal, I think, right, Kevin? Have they come with a similar proposal? This is a bit of a refinement to that discussion.
It would be sort of similar to the Apple proposal 2020. That it would apply a 30% state of charge below as practical to vehicles. This is just a slightly different take on it. Instead of saying the full 30% or low as practical, it adds the ability to verify it, at least with the larger vehicles.
Yeah, again, all pretty fresh. We're still sort of reviewing these and coming up with some comments and thoughts on them. But to your point, that is a verifiable mechanism with a vehicle, which sometimes you would lose in a standalone battery, perhaps. But
Steve, we have a question or a comment from Dick Hill?
Yeah, Dick Hill, FAA. Do you know, does this paper just target the battery that powers the device, or if the device has more than one battery? A lot of vehicles have multiple batteries or smaller batteries located in the vehicle. Is this defined in this paper as to what it means by the battery?
I would have to read it again, but my recollection is no, that it basically says that the indicated state of charge should be as low as practical or should, in any case, should not exceed 25%. So, but perhaps Todd has some.
Yeah, this is Todd McIntosh, General Motors. Just to, it's really targeted towards the propulsion battery. But keep in mind, when we say vehicles, it's, as you alluded to, it's not just automobiles, but also scooters and e-bikes. That's going to be the harder one. But the language that was proposed by IATA here was really leveraging existing vehicle packaging and structures in the other part of the dangerous goods regulation. So they use the quarter tank for those fuels as well. So they're trying to capture the larger battery, I guess is the way to put it, and putting constraints on that. But the quarter tank, again, they use that today for other vehicle and shipping dangerous goods. So that was the thought process. But it's not the other batteries in the vehicles, which could or could not be lithium, right? Where it's 12 volt or backup batteries, things like that. So.
And at the risk of hitting this button, because I don't think there's anything after this. Nope. So I'll look to see if there are any other questions. And again, we do have public meetings, and we do encourage and welcome any inputs and participation in that process to help inform our views. But yes, George, please.
Could you just take a couple minutes, and George Kirschman with PRBA, sorry, to describe what's going on at IMO?
Dwayne told me I couldn't. No, from a timing standpoint, not from a context.
That's not within our charter. This is air. Oh, God. You've been at, he said, well, what, can I have somebody ask?
Yes.
Did you
I
set him
didn't
up for
talk
this?
to George.
Oh, okay.
That's all right. Don't worry.
Oh, no, please.
No worries.
I'll give you the update briefly. So there is an informal correspondence group that is specifically looking at vehicles, all things associated with vehicle transport, Special Version 961 and 962, led by Ms. Hillary Sadoff from the Coast Guard. And that work is currently heading down veins of sort of splitting up the world of vehicles into new These definitions, as you know, are always very important but very difficult to define, especially when you're dealing with condition. But the world would be something along the lines of new, owned by a manufacturer, a distributor, original person, never titled, that kind of world. A damaged world, and we know how easy it is to tell if a lithium battery has been damaged, much less if a vehicle is damaged to the point it requires additional transport conditions. And then basically you'd have damaged and you'd have used. So there's a world, it's like a 3-tier system as well. You'd have new, used, and then damaged. So levels of regulation and addition. All of the things that, there was a paper submitted by the US to CCC 8, and all of those elements are still under consideration, one of which is a state of charge requirement for vehicles by vessel. But frankly, that is the extent of the discussions at IMO on lithium batteries at the moment. Some anecdotal discussions on Special Provision 188 and other things, but no proposals, so nothing formal.
Right. And I only brought that up, Dwayne, just because it's a state of charge issue that they're looking at IMO. So, you know, for everybody's edification that's in this business for vehicles, I mean, it's crossing all modes now, right? And when it comes to vehicles, and that's real important for everybody to understand.
It is, and since I have the mic, and I'm going to do it anyway, we did approve. Now approval is a tricky term because it has to go through the committees. Like Dwayne mentioned, ICAO's hierarchy. We have the same thing, but we did finalize, if you will, provisions for cargo tracking devices in use on vessels that are going to be exposed to atmospheres, and there are these tiers of temperature ranges, and it's 3 tiers of things that they'll eventually need to meet, and that was in coordination with the manufacturers of these devices and ISO and folks. But there's a delayed compliance period of 4 years, I believe, to give people time to try and develop things that will meet these standards. But perhaps that's something that can then be carried over into, say, the air world if those sort of same conditions are something that they experience in that mode. So.
Thanks, sir. Are there any other questions for Steve on this? Hearing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Doug Ferguson, Boeing.
Yeah, thank you. Doug Ferguson from Boeing. I'm kind of curious, is there an intention to try to apply the same types of requirements across the modes? And this is actually a 2-pronged question, I apologize. It's to PHMSA and the DOT, but it's also to some of the manufacturers or of the batteries or of the equipment in batteries. Like, so I'd also be really interested in hearing what George's take is on that as well.
Are you talking about for cargo tracking devices in general?
No, for vehicles.
No, I mean, Dwayne, we can take this.
I can't imagine it being something that would be needed for highway and rail transport. And so there's nothing at the UN, in other words. That would generally be where we would talk about multimodal provisions and stretch across all modes. But certainly because of incidents we've had in vessel, and certainly because of the concerns we have in air, it may be warranted, but I can't, at least there's nothing now that I'm aware of, anybody being interested to apply it to other surface modes.
Does that answer your question, both parts? Okay, great. Steve, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate that. Next on the agenda, we have future work. I want to give Bill Reese a chance to talk about something we had a discussion yesterday about with education. So, Bill?
Well, thanks, Bob. I'm Bill Reese. I'm the Director of Hazardous Materials Programs at Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. I was talking to Bob yesterday on a break, telling him a little bit about some of the things that I've been doing. And our members, actually, I'm kind of in a unique position because our members are enforcement on the highway side who started our association. But then we've also got our associate members who are the industry members, and there are many of you in here whose companies or associations are associate members of our alliance, of our association. So I get a couple of training grants from PHMSA. One of them is a community safety grant that is directed at training enforcement folks. And what we have done as far as lithium batteries go, one of the things we've done with that grant is we wrote a training course last year, and it's only 4 hours long. We're teaching it virtually. George looked at our curriculum, and I appreciate his input. Any of you that know Jim Barringer, who's been in this business about 50 years, he primarily does IATA and IMDG stuff. He looked at it as well, so I looked at some of the experts in the industry to give us input. But we started teaching that class to our enforcement folks quarterly. We do it virtually, so it's low cost, and we get about 40 people in each one of the classes that we do. But one of the things, and it stemmed from me sitting with all of you in here, is anything that goes by highway, or by air, I should say, at some point's on the highway. And so I added a module to this training to educate these highway enforcement folks on things they need to look for that maybe would be a red flag to them, that we've got something headed to a plane that maybe shouldn't go on a plane. And so, and some of the things that I also encourage them to do, especially if they work near an airport, is know your FAA inspectors. So if you run into something, know who to call, because they don't necessarily have any authority to take enforcement action maybe on some of that stuff going by air. But if they know who to call, we want them to do that. Also encourage them to have relationships with their PHMSA folks in their region, as well as their FMCSA state folks. I do also talk in that course about investigations, and one of the things that I also encourage them to do, and it's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, that's what makes this difficult, but if they have an incident with which they think or know for sure involves a lithium battery, I'm encouraging them to try to develop in their jurisdictions a method with these relationships they have to get a hold of those devices, if there's anything left of them, and get them to the right people to look at them. Because I know that's, collecting more data is one of the things we want to do here. So, and some of the suggestions, just for example, I've given them is a lot of these larger jurisdictions are going to have fire investigators come, or they have state fire marshals. Work with those people, and let's see if you can figure out in your jurisdiction a way to further the investigation so we can get what's left of a device to the right people to be looked at. So that's just some of the things we're doing. Now on the industry side, I get a grant, Hazardous Material Instructor Training Grant. And that's focused on instructors who are teaching hazmat employees. And I teach 2 classes, or I should say not just I've got about 3 full-time employees and then contract employees that do work for me. But we teach a 24 and a 40-hour class, an introductory and an advanced class to hazmat instructors. One of the things that I found the last few years since we started doing this, teaching these industry instructors, is I'm getting a lot of questions about lithium batteries. So I took the curriculum that was developed under our community safety grant, made some changes to it, and developed a shipping lithium batteries course, and it takes about 4.5 hours, and delivering that to our trainers that are dealing with lithium batteries. And I added a module of that one where we're going in and we're looking at, I'll give them, say, a laptop battery, and I want to ship it this way. How are we going to do that? And we go through the steps. Another one we do is a big lithium power bank, say a 2,000 watt-hour lithium power bank. And it can't go on a passenger aircraft, but I'll give them the scenario. Hey, we want to ship this on a passenger aircraft. Can we? Because we want them to look at the regulations and apply them correctly. And after we teach these classes, whether it's to the industry, through enforcement, for the next couple of weeks afterwards, I get calls and I get emails from people. And there's a lot of, and I can tell you there is a significant problem out there with undeclared or misdeclared. I'm getting pictures of things, I'm getting copies of shipping papers, and on the highway side, it's a significant problem. I, at my own house, have received at least 2 totally undeclared and 1 misdeclared I sent George pictures of one of them, and he helped me make some contacts. I also sent the information to PHMSA, but I've had 2 lithium power banks sent to my house, one 1,000 watt hour, one 2,000 watt hour, where the shipper actually took clear white plastic, covered up all the DOT markings, taped it all up, and shipped it totally undeclared. That's totally intentional, and I've provided that information to PHMSA. But that's the kind of stuff we're seeing on the highway side. Now, I will tell you on the highway side, we do have what I think is a pretty good thing going as far as reporting undeclared. We have a couple of inspection bulletins that are available on our website, and we provide those both to the enforcement and the industry folks, and there is a email address on there where they can report undeclared shipments. And so we provide that to them. In the industry courses, I also make them aware that you're obligated per the regulations to report undeclared shipments. So that's just some things we're doing on the highway side, but there's clearly a nexus to air shipments. The big thing that, since being in this group with all of you, I've tried to do what I can to educate the folks on the highway side to do what we can to keep some of this stuff from getting to aircraft and to identifying as much of the undeclared as we can. So that's really all I have, and if there are any questions, I stand to answer those.
Are there any questions for Bill?
All right, thank you.
I have a comment for you. I want to thank you for the work you're doing. You know, it's the last 3 meetings I've taken notes over things that I think are really important to talk about, and it's always education and outreach. I write that down every time, and I think, what are we going to do? How are we going to do something about education and outreach? You're doing it solo. We have to think about it collectively as a group, you know, what we can do about education and outreach, because I think we all keep saying the same thing. The regulations are complicated, it's hard, and then there's people who are intentionally non-compliant also. And as we can stop that, all these are mitigation risks. I see a hand going up, George Kircher.
So Bill, thanks for that. So I'm always a little confused about the people of the part of your association and who you're training sometimes. So the drivers, like of the vehicles, are they in the training?
I'm not directly training them. Who I train is the trainers that train them.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so it's the Hazardous Material Instructor Training Grant through PHMSA is real specific, and it's you're training people to be trainers.
Gotcha.
So so it could be drivers, it could be dock workers, it can be anybody in that hazmat supply chain.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that question is the following, like talking to our members who ship with FedEx, UPS, and so forth, they will tell me on a regular basis, hey, they rejected my shipment. And I'm like, well, because they're really well versed on the lithium battery regulations. They know what to look for, right? So I'm always curious about, but I don't hear anything about the LTL, carriers rejecting shipments because the label's not there or the shipping paper's incorrect, that type of thing. So, and maybe that will change as more and more of them become sensitive. Like if they get a pallet of lead batteries, they know what to look for, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a big lithium battery, the information's just not there. They're not educated enough, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the word's getting out there. I had an LTL carrier get a hold of me just last week. They sent me some pictures, clearly fully regulated. It's got labels, markings. It's in a 4G box. And when the driver went to pick it up, the shipper says, "Oh, that's just lithium batteries. Doesn't require shipping papers." Well, and they sent it to me. I'm going, "Well, your driver's right. They need shipping papers, so don't take it." So, just real quick, one other thing that I'm doing. A lot of our members, as well as a lot of the industry folks that come to our training classes, are multimodal shippers. They're shipping by multiple modes. And so one of the things that I try to emphasize in the training is that if you're shipping by multiple modes, you need to make sure you're familiar with the training requirements of the different modes. Don't just think, well, we're primary highway, we don't need to look at air if we're dropping a unit load device off somewhere, or we don't need to look at vessel if we're dropping a freight container off at a port. And, because there's things they need to be looking at and considering, so we go over some of those things at a high level just to make them aware that they need to be looking at those things. So, anyway, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate that. And, for all the members, we'll have to consider downrange either having a working group or rolling this into the hazardous analysis subcommittee, but we really have to do something around education and outreach, because I think we just keep nodding our heads going, yeah, that's the problem. And so we don't have to reach a decision on that today, but I think, let that ferment in your mind and think about who might want to participate in something like that.
You have a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where's the hand? Is it someone online?
Yeah, you got him open? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
No, I just wanted to mention batteriestransport.org. I don't know if you guys already talked about that, but it's like a bunch of industry trade associations, including PRBA and MDTC, where we've invested resources. We pay annual fee to maintain this site where we educate folks on the battery transport regulations. And we do that because, we want to ensure that, the good guys, we're all working together to educate the people who might be cheating or not complying. And then as far as what the previous speaker talked about, when they advise PHMSA of a situation where somebody's really not following the regulations, what actually occurs? Do we know, in that situation that you talked about, that some action was taken?
And that was Bob Richards on the phone, right? Is that right, Bob?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
So
And
who-
I put the batterytransport.org website link.
Who funds batterytransport.org, just out of curiosity?
There's probably 10 or
it's-
so.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, it's George.
yeah,
So,
George,
yeah,
yeah.
so it's OPEI, PRBA, MPTC, our counterpart in Europe, Recharge, and 7 or 8 other battery associations and product manufacturer associations. And thanks, Bob, for bringing this up, because that is real important. Again, batteriestransport.org, it covers 49 CFR, transport, Canada's DG regs, the ADR for ground in Europe, IATA, and IMDG for all batteries, not just lithium.
Well, great, you're
We
helping
all
out with the work then.
voluntarily just contribute to that and spend,
That's terrific. Thank you.
We all contribute to that voluntarily because we care about, enhancing safety.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Thank you. I see a hand coming up. Bill?
Yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention was that this training that we offer, because it's grant funded, they don't have to be members of our association to take the training. Anybody can take it, so we open it up to everybody and advertise it to everybody, so just so everybody's aware of that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. We're in the section of the agenda where we talk about future work, and we've had some discussions about different working groups, because we're starting to really kind of break down these problems into smaller pieces, and there was some consensus about a medical device working group that Stefan Rossetti from Medtronic was willing to chair. And Stefan, I want to ask you publicly, are you still willing to to chair that and come out with a fair and balanced group of people on your committee?
Yes, Stefan Rossetti, Medtronic. Yep, absolutely. I agree to lead that working group for medical devices.
Okay. We definitely want to make sure it's fair and balanced, so you understand that. And, as you build your team, if you would email us so we can just kind of, green light it, that would be wonderful.
Understood. Some of the my colleagues around the table have already reached out to me, but I will make sure that we have a fair participation, and I will inform the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stefan. And Doug Ferguson from Boeing, we had a conversation about the 30% stated charge working group, people being able to maybe address that issue. And so, Doug, I want to ask you, in a public setting, are you still willing to chair a group like that would also be fair and balanced?
Yes, I would be.
Okay. I try and be as formal as I can. It sounds like you're getting married, but I just want to make it fair and balanced.
While we're on the subject,
Yes.
I think somebody yesterday talked to me about participating there, and I didn't write their name down. I did write down the name of somebody from today, so if you remember when you talked to me, please come back again. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. I like the concept of us thinking about downrange education and outreach. I mean, I'm really happy that we had that presentation from you, Bill, and George, the website that Bob talked about. That all helps us, build a blueprint for the future. We we talked about the next meeting being November 2nd, 2023. That'll be our 8th meeting of the Lithium Battery Air Safety Advisory Committee. Before I end the meeting, I want to give everybody who wants to say something a chance to say something. So if you feel there's something you want to add to this discussion, go ahead. David Roth, I see your hand up.
David Roth, ULSE. Wanted to clarify a point that was on the insight slide when I got all rattled because of something that was running through my head. So over the past 5 years in checked baggage, there have been 53 thermal incidents over that 5-year period in checked baggage. And in fact, 8 of those incidents, or 15%, did occur on the aircraft. So the percentage that was shown on the slide was correct. The time frame 2022 was not right. It was over the 5-year period. And it was 8 incidents, not 9. So just that clarification.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Did anybody else have any questions or anything else they wanted to ask, a comment? All right, then, hearing none, let the meeting minutes reflect that at 4:25, the meeting will be ended officially. And I want to thank everybody for their participation in this group. It's really an honor to get to work with you guys. Thank you.